So good morning, everyone. If you've been in one of my sessions before this week, I feel like we honorary member of your Learning Week team. So thanks for having me back in. And if you've been in one of the sessions before as well, this is a little bit of a step change. I've been asked to do a session around time management and timekeeping, which is one of the things we do, one of the sessions we lead at Dare2Lead. So I want to talk about this idea of how do we look at time management, something that lots of us talk about, whinge about, think we've mastered, say we're rubbish at, always want to develop on. So let's just play around with this a wee bit. It's something that I've worked very personally, very hard on getting better at, and lots of people always assume when they see me out and about, whether it's in a couple of organisations I run, working publicly, all the ad hoc stuff I do, they always think I work really hard and I'm super busy. And I always try and not be that. I actually try and be really on top of working smart as opposed to working hard, and being productive as opposed to being busy. And I want to make the argument that those are very different things. An offer was made to me a number of years ago, which had a big impact on how I think about things, and it's perhaps you've heard this or had this before too. And somebody sat me down one day, a very wealthy individual actually, as it happened, and says, John, I want to invest in you 86,400 quid every day, but there's a catch. You have to spend it each day, it hits zero again at midnight and you go again. What would you spend it on? And I thought about it, and I turned, you know, you get all your pleasantries out the way and fun things you want to get. But the one I wasn't sure, the one thing I was clear on is if I knew it hit zero at the end of the day and it restarted, I was going to make sure I spent that money and used every quid of it. To which he then replied, that is fantastic. So you're not sure what you're going to do it, but you know you need to use it all up effectively. And I was like, you better believe it. It was then put to me, well, you're already getting that every day. And went on to explain that in each day there's 86,400 seconds in each day. And put to me, think of each one of them like a bit of investment. And are you spending each one of those seconds as effectively or as proactively as you think you are, or as in theory you'd like to? And that was a really powerful provocation to me. That was a really powerful challenge around actually how much am I sort of flushing down the toilet as opposed to banking in something useful, even if that's proactively in my own well-being and rest. Am I using every bit of that daily credit, I suppose, of time to the maximum? Am I getting the greatest bang for my buck in terms of what I want to achieve, particularly in the workplace? So that was just a really useful way of thinking about how am I dissecting up my day? How are you thinking about how you're spending your day? Are you making the most of the time you have in front of you? Or are you one of these people that look back and go, should have, would have, could have? I'm thinking about getting to maybe's aye, maybe's no kind of person. So it was really interesting. But the heart of today's session, this is a very practical tool to use session. And I want to talk about from the outset what to do with those to-do lists. Now, lots of us might not have to-do lists. Most of us probably do, I'm going to assume. And actually, the fact that we have one, because you think, oh, I'm a to-do list kind of person, that you're maybe in the upper echelon of self-structuring, proactive organisation compared to perhaps others who don't. But I want to make the argument this morning, and I don't need us all to agree, but the thing we need to do with our to-do lists is put them in the bin. I want to make the argument that we have all been doing to-do lists wrong over the years with that old-fashioned kind of date at the top or project, and then just writing that kind of drop-down, creeping death of bullet points of just stuff to do or get done with that. So I want to make that argument today, and I want to do that by offering a new tool to replace that old list system with, and I want to provoke I suppose, to yourselves a habit challenge. And habits being behaviours that we do on repeat, that works often for us once, or was an early life go-to behaviour, which we just keep doing, which then, when the habit sets in, it becomes the pattern, which becomes comfortable, which becomes comfort zones. And what we often find with leadership is, rather than being effective in adopting the ABC mentality that I spoke about this week around what I see as really effective leadership, is always be challenging and challenging yourself, which means always be changing, is we confuse comfort zone and being comfortable with being effective and willing to change. And the activity I always do this, and you can sit and do this at home. I know not everyone here has got their cameras on, but I'm going to ask everyone if you can take your arms, like you're at primary school, and fold them. Pull this down. And you can just do this for yourself at home, and fold your arms over. Now, if you look down, you'll probably see, and you may have done this before, but many probably haven't, you may see that you have one sort of forearm on top of the other. And you may see that you've got one extrovert, cheeky set of fingers or hands sticking out. And you might find that you've gone wee shy, tucked away hand in some form. Some people may sit like that, and that's fine, but you'll see that you've got a hidden wrist and a visible wrist tucked away, and that's fine. Now I want you to do, and I can only see a few of you on the camera, but I want you to now think about spinning them round. So when you turn the other one and put the other forearm on top, the other wrist underneath, the other hand on top. I'm quite enjoying. I watched one person in particular thinking, what are you talking about? That's going to be really easy. And then I watched them struggle with that on top. So it's reversed. Now, some of you, by the looks of it, are finding that maybe more straightforward than others. And I just want you to sit in that. Now, feel free to type into, I don't know if the chat's open. Is the chat open, Katie? Do people want to just now type into the chat without unfolding it? No, I'm kidding. You can unfold your arms. Without unfolding your arms. Just any words, how that second version feels. And if you're like totally normal, like nothing at all, that's totally cool as well. But I can tell it's not true for everybody. Vicky Fife, it's you I can see on my screen. So Katie, do you want to read a couple of them out? I just can't see anything.
I can indeed. I've also, I think Vicky's also got her hand up. Vicky, I've allowed you to unmute.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have the chat function for some reason.
Oh, don't worry.
Feel Vicky for you then. Well, we've got you.
No worries.
Oh,
did you get John's question there, Vicky? How did that feel for you?
How did the arms feel?
Yeah.
Quite strange, actually, going into the second one. And yes, I was one of those ones, John, that was going round and round and round, trying to get it in place.
And why is that?
Because it's because of the habit. I go into another. So yeah, it's the habit.
And how many of you immediately wanted to fire back to the first version again, just to get that comfort zone back and that emotional security of how you always decided in life you fold your arms? Probably lots of us. And the argument, and thanks for coming in on that, Vicky. The argument or the theory goes that, so I'm just, my laptop was about to die. The argument or the theory goes that that's the same with everything. How you respond to being put on the spot and challenged, how you respond to stress, how you organize yourself, how you prepare. You get into habitual routines that become comfortable, and our bodies and our minds crave comfort and security, which is a normal self-survival thing. And we want that. We want that to feel quite often predictable. And with all reactions or behavioural choices we make, including how we use our time, how we think and manage, one of the arguments we want to make is that really effective people who stay in a constant learning mode learn the difference between what's maximising efficiency in what is sort of swimming in the pool of comfort. So it's just one way analogy around there'll be some sort of function with how we use our time, or what we do when we're not effectively using our time is a bit of that. And the challenge is, can you just play around with the idea of a different way of thinking or acting to get different results? And we all know that old cliche saying now, if you keep doing the same things and expecting different results, that's one definition of crazy or insanity or whatever. So on that principle that I talk about, the idea of habits in that sense. So we might all feel that at times in our day or in our work or in things we need to do, we just feel a wee bit like that jar. We've just not got enough capacity to get everything in that we need to get in. And we try our best and we try and compress the bits that we need and build up and capture it all in. And that's fine. And sometimes it is just too much and we overload, and we need to look at strategies for ensuring that we're able to get a lid on things, quite literally, at the end of each day, week, term, year, shift, whatever. But there's a really important thing around here is actually, if we assume that our capacity is the jar, and the different forms of stones, pebbles and sand are different tasks we need to complete, there's a really important thing that effective time managers do, or effective leaders, or people who can facilitate productive and smart lives do, and that's to understand the importance of sequence, of ordering, of prioritization. And actually, if we think a bit smartly, and many of us I'm sure do already, or just think a bit more in advance around the what, the how, the why, the when of what tasks we do and how we engage with what we've got on in our day, you start to find that actually by adapting the framework of how we tackle things, you start to realize that capacity is actually there and a bit. So we often live in a very emotional comfort zone around, oh, I've just not got time, or I've tried it before, or no one else is doing it, or I've just got too much on at the minute, or it's just one of those days. And we find language and parlance to kind of uphold an immediate negative attitude around just feeling overwhelmed or busy or snowed under, or living in a slight addiction to chaos. And we either realize it or we don't sometimes. So this jar analogy is just that idea of what I want to explore is how you get first things first. And that same term around first things first actually comes from, some of you may have looked at this, I think the relatively well-known book now by Stephen Covey around the 7 habits of highly effective people. And one of those core habits, and again, it's coming into this idea that Vicky used to think they would adjust his habit, become comfortable, is we can retrain our habits. They are emotional connections with behaviors that we do and repeat, which becomes patterns, habits, comfort zone, is how we then start to think about how we habitually reorchestrate our ability to put first things first, to ensure our capacity of our daily jars, which is full of that £86,400, is all spent effectively, and we don't feel like we're overflowing and we're not able to get a lid on things. And here's the 7 habits. So you may have seen these before. I'm not going to go through all of the 7 habits, but it is a little checker flag to order the book in, and it's, I think, a few quid these days on Amazon or any other far more ethical provider of books to think about one useful tool. So it's a model we're going to introduce, and a model for me is just a useful tool for the brain to in itself organize our thoughts. And the bit we're going to focus on this morning between now and 10 o'clock is putting first things first. So what we want to look at is how we do that. So I'm bringing back my good old friend, the Ginger Square, the Ginger Quadrant. And this is a tool that I want to introduce to you. Some of you might have seen it. Hopefully, if we get a couple of minutes, I'll put you in a little conversation group. But the main bit here is to give kind of like a practical thing that hopefully we can go away and apply and try, and maybe take 15 minutes over a coffee, maybe later today or straight after the session or whatever, where you can try implanting some of your real daily life tasks into this framework of thinking. And what Covey and what thinkers, what Dare2Lead make the argument about is not all tasks are created equal, and there's different metrics or measurements which are super simple but important we need to sort of think about, to think, how do you absolutely maximize being the best version of yourself, not just in your employment but in life generally. And people always talk about this, how good an employee you are is often really connected with how good you are at personing, how good you are at like people existing, at living and being more generally as a human, connecting up that mindset of efficiency across the piece. That's not to say we need to be switched on and super kind of superhuman leader all the time, but there's little tweaks we can do that can create broader change. I call it jiu-jitsu changes. So I don't know if anyone's done jiu-jitsu, but it's that idea of a very small move or pressure point or alteration to an impact can create a bigger change and see the whole weight of things transferred over with just the not having to be strong but be smart. So there's two things that we talk about looking at here around effective time management. And the first thing, and as it might sound really silly or obvious or blatant, is how important is it? And you might find you start writing little silly things for ages in a to-do list, and you start to get to the chunkier things at the bottom, or you go, oh, I should have done that yesterday and I focused all my time on this or whatever. So the first thing is thinking about how important is something. And the second thing we need to look at is timeliness, obviously. So the sense of urgency, how critical or urgent is a certain task. So these are sort of the two metrics that then create obviously the corresponding quadrants here, and that top left one being important and urgent, top right being very important also, but perhaps less urgent or less immediate. And then conversely, the bottom two, they're both seen as less important, but it could be less important with an urgency and less important or not important with no urgency as well, which sounds like a no-brainer of things not to do. But if we dig a bit deeper, we might find that lots of us spend our life living or spending our £86,000 or so in that shop of not important and not urgent. So what's the model set out? If something is very important and very urgent, it becomes de facto a necessity. It is important, it is required, and it is sort of needed now. So these are things that unexpected situations arising that you also deem this is very important and urgent. I need to act on that. It might be very tightly time-bound tasks or very kind of quick or close deadlines. Maybe you've got to get a funding bid in, you've got kind of an immediate thing into your manager, whatever. There's a short-term crisis management situation that requires immediate attention. Could be something that's last minute come up, but it has a huge opportunity attached to it or a huge impact. There's something from the external world that's come in, it just presents opportunity. Or it could be those kind of tasks or things that require you very specifically and you very urgently. It's can you drop what you're doing and do this, or you've identified that you need to pause other things you're doing and pick that up. So box one is seen as necessity because it's urgent and it's seen as important. So what happens if something's also very important, but it's not necessarily seen as urgent? So we talk here about the things in this box that is about moving towards less necessity, but more about effectiveness. So you've already identified that they're very important, but they're perhaps not sitting there with an immediacy or an urgency to it. So these might be things that are seen as more longer term, perhaps relationship or trust building things. This is about quality renewal, you know, in terms of broader navel gazing in your job. It could be broader recreational things that are kind of more wrapped around catch-ups, which are very important, but just getting time to do it. It's things that are perhaps more around proactive, around prevention, planning, preparing, creating space for improvement. It might be that important stuff around coaching, helping, developing others, navel gazing around business development, recognizing new opportunities, bit of innovation that can often really involve your learning and development as well. So these are things that you're seeing down the line. Could be something system change. You know that intranet system is built really rubbish and you want to get around to fixing it. It's really important, but you never find the time to kind of fix the holes on the planks of the ship. You know you're not sinking, there's a bit of water, but you're fine for now. But actually, you know, if you got that repaired, things could be would sail smoother, much more effectively for the longer term. So that's that idea of things that are perhaps seen as less urgent but very important. The next box we talk about here is things that are not important at all, but are put to you with a great sense of urgency. So we call that deception or distraction, actually, and that's the idea. It doesn't really matter, but can you do this right now for me, please? Or this needs to be done, or you feel that needs to be done. So this is so often, usually, those pesky last-minute requests from others, or those last-minute demands or requirements because of perhaps the lack of efficiency or effectiveness from others in the first place. You're being interrupted or asked of a lot and by others, and it's actually well-meaning, but perhaps often not that productive at all. You're maybe peer pressured to go and join in things that perhaps isn't critical to you. If you decide, you know, that there, for example, it talks about socialising, that this group activity, quiz night, you know, informal drinks is really important, and it's about a sense of culture and gelling together and all the rest of it, then fine, you're still proactively understanding where that sits for you. But often you get things like comfort zone activities, and the big thing is give yourself permission to not always be available. It is okay to not be around. It's okay to not be immediate. And this is what's kind of called comfort zone activities. So are you one of these people that just sort of sit by the inbox waiting to feel busy? You know, it's coming in, it's not had any real thought, you're very reactive, and we might find that often it might well be important, but it's probably not, but it may well have urgency with it. Because it's coming right in that second, or you want to respond immediately, but actually is it because it's important? And it's just that reactive existence. It's that wherever the wind blows, you will find yourself going. And you often see lots of people like this. They look like they're always rushed off their feet and crazy busy, and we often admire that. I want to call that out. If there's that person who goes, you're always snowed under, you're always busy, what you're doing is amazing, you've got great resilience, I tend to not be that impressed by those people who are doing that. And the fourth one is waste. So it's worse than deception, or it's more strongly put, or absolutely procrastination. And you might be one of these people that starts to recognise living in this box. And this is those people who sit the whole time rewriting to-do lists, shuffling tasks around. They do a lot of talking about things they're going to do, and it's often called displacement activities is the easiest way of putting this box. But what are those things that you then, do you ever find you do the most procrastinating or focusing on something completely not important at the times when you've got loads of really critical stuff to do? You become so busy and you've got such a set of deadlines, you end up, all of a sudden the house is spotless. All of a sudden you want to count the coppers in your jar. You find yourself rearranging things, or you do unproductive trivial stuff. That's when Candy Crush makes lots of progress, or you start to just delve into random emails or sit on lengthy long phone calls talking about being busy, or you're doing that unfocused perusing of things. And there's a phenomenon I think here as well, perhaps in those bottom two around the working from home impact. And I know I certainly find myself, as much as I talk about being more productive at home, is it just different? And I find myself kind of waning off into different wee cubby holes of activities or thoughts, particularly when perhaps I want to get on top of things. I'm delaying, I'm displacing, I'm sort of delaying the inevitable a wee bit. And I know for me that there's certain things that I end up doing which usually involves this thing here, as opposed to getting stuck in to the day. Okay, everybody, welcome back. I know those breakout groups are the worst because there's never enough time to get into it, or you know, you just heard one person's contribution or two people, and then there's not space or whatever. But I purposely didn't have a huge activity or structure to that bit, because just space to reflect and say what was in people's heads at the time, I think, was just the useful bit for people that wanted to input. And I just want to say at this point, I know it's really difficult, particularly in the moment or at work, to focus on really clearly and proactively what to spend our time on. I know we often do get kind of distracted from focusing on kind of our key goals and activities and other people's priorities, and seemingly urgent tasks come in, and simply doing the things we enjoy, so we live in that comfort zone. In the scheme of things, can be really difficult. The aim of this matrix is to just help organise, for you to be a more intelligent self-filter for how you place and focus on what's coming up. And it comes back to that phrase, put first things first, is one of the single greatest acts of organisational empowerment you can give yourself, to say, I am going to have a sense of understanding of what's in front of me. I'm going to make sure that I'm focusing on the first things that really matter. I sometimes call it eat the biggest cactus in the morning. There's a tweet we can make for it, I don't know, but eat the biggest cactus in the morning. That thing that you don't want to get into and swallow and deal with, go for the biggest, scariest one first, because it's often the most important thing. And you know, whether that's the rest of the wee things can wait and trust that you'll get them done. But if you have that morning of saying, okay, what is the most critical thing? I can't, you know, I'm going to use this analogy, in 86 grand in the bank, but I've got 200 grand of activities that I need to get done. I want to make sure I'm not buying the cheap and, you know, trashy stuff. I need to get the real investment pieces out of the way. Very, very important around a smart investment of your time. So one of the interesting provocations is, with this, where do we want to be living? What kind of quadrant do we want to be spending our time in? And the truth is, you want to spend a bit of time in all of them, but there is absolutely traps here. So what are the longer term results? So within necessity, this is important, because what's the long-term results of living entirely in necessity? It's very urgent, it's very important. You want to spend all your time there, right? That makes sense. No, it doesn't. Why? Because what this is there's an urgency that never goes. What happens when your boiler is on full whack the whole time? A, it's just got a lot more expensive, and B, you're going to risk burning out. You find yourself in constant firefighting mode. You're in stress mode all the time. You're in burnout. People, and largely yourself, you might find you get demoralized. People on a personality scale or kind of working styles who are very red, they like to make tangible progress, they like to be efficient or task driven. Great. Don't confuse efficient with being strategic, and being productive with being long term, because actually it's probably going to be unsustainable. You're on the hamster wheel. Well, you're up and running, is great, but you might find you hit meltdown very, very quickly. So whilst you do have an element of responding to this, because being productive and being efficient is good things, if you only live on a firefighting thing around, you just become a kind of generically competent person who responds to things last minute. Although it might be a comfort zone for you, it's probably not sustainable. And actually, when do you get round to those bigger ticket items that are not urgent but are very, very important, which flips you over into effectiveness? These things aren't urgent always, but they're very important. So there's time, but there's also a critical element to this. So what does that start to look at? When you do those longer term planning stuff, the investment pieces, this is where empowerment of others comes in, stronger relationships can form. They start to have kind of structural resilience. You look at vision, this is where perspective lives. You can prioritize and balance. And you know what, you get a lot of the benefits of the necessity box, but you're often in better control. You're applying proactive discipline. You're able to kind of start to operate with fewer crises. You've reduced the risk of failure because you've got time to onboard, to plan. Did you ever find the thing that if you want something done well, I'll just do it my bloody self? And often that's people who are living in the important and urgent. You've not got time to bring others on board, to think it through, to be longer term. And that's often a flaw. Sometimes you have no choice, but actually you should always, as great long-term leaders, have an ability to be sustainable, to be effective, to be efficient. And often that's focusing on things that are important, even though they're not urgent, because you don't want to get in that urgency is often other people's priorities and they're forcing it on you, or things that you tell yourselves urgent to live in a zone of feeling important or busy. But to distinguish that from what is important is often the critical impact. What's the long-term results of that? Not very important, but very urgent. Well, it shares a lot of the issues of necessity, but it's more dangerous because these things don't really matter. They're urgent, but they don't matter. Responding to that random email, doing that non-critical request, it's short-termism. It risks your overall effectiveness. It becomes a distraction. You do all this stuff and you might find you're feeling victimized, you're not in control of stuff, you're overworked. You're running around all day doing what you think everyone else is telling you to do, that you don't actually start to build anything really meaningful. I've even had this, if I'm honest, with teams that I've managed. I've found people have not really understood the role, or they've not had a clear focus. So what they do is any random thing, or it could be look over this flyer that we're getting designed, or does anyone want to come into this group, or can somebody pick that up for me, or we need to drop these off at that site. That's helpful, but you find eventually you do start to resent it, and you sort of blame others sometimes for that actually you could have said no, and you go, oh yes, but Charlie's asked me to do that all the time, or I'm not getting a chance to do that, and you lose focus. You feel overwhelmed 1 minute to empty the next. So some people want to be busy and they like feeling important. So you might find you say yes to all these things. You go, oh, I've got to do that for them, or I've got to be down there looking at this or picking that up. Do you ever find that 1 minute you're super busy and overwhelmed, but the second that big deadline's hit or that bit of work's done, you go, oh, right, wait, what am I doing? Right. And that's when you have the extra long fag or phone call, or you chat that bit longer at the kettle, or whatever, and you actually think, I was super busy, and I am, but my brain's just now chased the deadline that's gone, and I actually don't know what to pick up. I've got so much to do, I don't know where to start. So it's often, be careful you're not one of these people that becomes addicted to chaos. And that's on both sides of the urgency. It might be very important or it might not, but if you find you're addicted to being busy in the chaos element, what you're not doing is addicted to being really strategic about what matters and what doesn't. So we confuse urgency with importance, and it's really critical that you start to disassociate those comfort zones of thought, so there's that thing around don't get addicted to the chaos, get addicted to the efficiency is very important. And something that's not important and not urgent is just waste. It's procrastinating, it's displacement, you lose opportunities for development, you start to risk your reputation or delivery, you become dissatisfied long term, others as well get dissatisfied perhaps in you. And this is one of the ones where you regret or you fret. Do you look back and go, I wish I'd put that application in, or I should have got around to that, or I didn't apply for that at the time, or I meant to do that, or you find, why did I sit for 3 hours, I don't know, watching housewives of, I don't know, Western Wales when it should have, been on this task or whatever. You become unproductive and you start to normalize bad habits. You spend 20 minutes playing a daft game on your phone each day. And you might call it a warm-up for the mind or whatever, but usually it's displacement. So those are some of the risks associated with these things, and maybe some of that came out in your conversations as you were chatting there. So what does that tell us? Where do we want to be living? So there's just the quadrants there: urgent and important, not urgent but important, and so on. Where do we want to be spending our time? Primarily, highly effective people learn to live in the important section. That goes without saying. My challenge to you is, like I have with mine, you can see there's my actual to-do list. It's a quadrant every time. There's no lists now. It becomes placement. And I try to make sure that the vast majority of what I'm doing is living up there. Otherwise, why is it on my list? Why have I got something that's not urgent or important on a to-do list? Fine to say that, but however, if you live in that important and urgent, that's not sustainable. So the really effective people learn to live in the things that are really important, whether they're urgent or otherwise, actually. It's that thing around, I'm proactively driving out a sense of direction with first things first. I need to review this. I need to get that project going. We need to invest our time or our money or our efforts or our staffing there. We need to make sure that bit's covered off really critically. Otherwise, we're firefighting, fixing a problem rather than building the system that works. So this is where strategic long-termism really starts to come in. So it's that kind of identification of urgent, yes, but it's really focusing on what's super important. So my challenge to you is, as a next do, take your to-do list, rip it up. Soon after, you've created your quadrants and you start to place all those tasks within it. So what do we do? And this is where I'll start to wrap in. What the model argues, is if something's seen as important and urgent, do it. It's so important and you need to do it now, absolutely. However, as you start to get on top of things and you start to focus on those less urgent importance, you want to really decide really critically, make a proactive commitment to yourself. You're going to decide to focus on things that are important, but not urgent. And that's where you start to have the long-termism. That's where you start to have the vision, you're catching up with people, they're getting on top of stuff. You have decided to place that in your diary, to bulk out time for yourself to go and focus on that. Before you're chasing the night before deadline. And lots of you are those people at uni that had those essays to get in, and all of a sudden the house was spotless, you were catching up with people, and you rush, you create the panic. But if you decide up front, this isn't urgent, but it's very important, I'm going to focus on that. The other D, these are all Ds, is if it's not important, but it is urgent, delegate. It matters, excuse me, can someone get this done for me? It's okay to ask for help, pass it down the chain, pass it up the chain, pass it along the chain. Delegate that either in your diary to a later stage, if you can, but if it's very urgent, delegate it to someone else to help out, pick up, do that, pass it on. Don't create a bad habit with that. And things that are not urgent and not important, say no. You've got to delete it. So this is really important around what you do, what you decide you're going to make sure you do, what you delegate onwards, or what you delete from your focus entirely. So that's the basics of the model around starting to break things up into urgent and important. So I'm going to pull that in there. I think we just hit 10 o'clock. That was a bit of a tour de force, but the idea was a useful tool that you can go away and try out. So I'll pass over to Alison or Katie to pick up, but hopefully that makes sense and you can start to give yourself some space to use that.